Hey everyone. In this episode, I'm joined by Peep Laja, who is the founder of several B2B focused brands, including Wynter, CXL, and Speero. If you've been in marketing for any length of time, you've definitely seen some of his content. He's an expert in buyer intelligence and product marketing, as well as the host of the How to Win podcast, which I'm a huge fan of. We sat down and we talked about the winning strategies that B2B companies are using today, like building demand for companies with multiple sub-brands, and how to build a brand that aligns with your core audience in ICP. You're definitely going to want to take some notes on this one. So let's get into it.
So Pep, thanks for joining us. This is exciting. Thanks for hopping on the show.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off really quickly. I'm a big fan of your podcast, to How to Win. And one of the things that I am looking at over time has really been just having conversations with marketers on this show, just talking about sort of practically speaking, what are they seeing that's working? What are they seeing that's not working? And sort of staying away from some of the fluff. So, obviously, you're not a big fan of fluff. I think we see eye to eye on that, and, super, super excited about having you on. So
awesome.
So,
do this.
So let's just sort of dive right in if we can. So you've had numerous interviews. I've watched a bunch of them, through your research. How would you sort of say that the most successful B2B marketing companies are winning today? Like, what would be maybe like the 2 or 3 areas that you see that they're winning today?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, if you want to be winning, and competition is not in every, let's say, market or niche with enough demand. So really, you need to be the best at something. It's like a prerequisite. And while being the best for a particular type of customer, because you can't be best universally, being best for a certain type of customer, and also being clearly distinct from other alternative options to you. So you're different and best at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that's really the recipe for winning. And then we can add here also that you have a product or service that's tapping into pre-existing demand. So a lot of people want to buy what you're selling. Your odds of success go up. In email marketing, which you know quite a bit about. I mean, even company number 38 is raking it in because everybody's using email, right? Yeah. It's just a colossal market.
So it's being better than competition, but really in the category that you're in as well, right? So you're
exactly. So underlying assumption is that you got to play the choose your customer game.
Yeah.
So you choose who you're going to serve, and you can serve multiple audiences, obviously, depending on how big you are, how many resources you have. But for that select audience that is clearly well defined, marketing informs product, product informs marketing. So you use the language, you talk about their problems, and whatever you pitch the way they want to be pitched to, and at the same time. It's in tech, in SaaS, it's extremely difficult to build a truly differentiated product because everybody has every feature. But you can have those edge cases for that specific segment that you're after. So you can have you solve some of their problems better, objectively better than alternatives.
So this is fascinating to me right now because this is the exact exercise that our marketing team is going through. This is. We have a lot of listeners on that I'm sure are engaged, but I'm going to be selfish really quickly and just sort of talk through while I've got you. So as Constant Contact, we have what I'm going to call the getting serious customer, right? These are the people that, are small businesses that, they've got their tools in place and they're looking for email, for example, right? And so that's in terms of the spectrum, that's one product within the spectrum. And then there is more of a getting more sophisticated customer, which is going to require things like marketing automation. They're going to have hired their first, couple of salespeople that need CRM and, those sorts of things. And that's a different animal altogether, right? And so here we are, we have Constant Contact as an umbrella brand. We have 2 core products, an email product and a more competitive or more comprehensive marketing platform. How would you sort of look at that? If you were coming in and you were in my shoes, what would you say in a scenario like that when you're thinking about building demand for 2 polar opposite sort of customer audiences under a single brand?
Yeah. So, well, I would look at them completely separately and imagine it's 2 different companies. To start. And so I will look at the competitive landscape. So here are all the customers who are buying in this market, everybody. And I would start drawing circles of which lines of the market our big competitors going after. What's MailChimp doing, or what's ActiveCampaign doing, and who are they going after? And how are they overlapping? So how is MailChimp overlapping with ActiveCampaign, for instance, and how much, And so, and then there's like adjacent, like there's Klaviyo. Okay, they get the email marketing slice, right?
Yep.
Okay, and MailChimp doesn't get much of that at all, and so on and so forth. So you map out all these players, and then you think about yourself and your customers. Like, what's the common thread? And so which competitor do you want to overlap with, or not at all? So maybe there's an underserved segment of the customers that nobody's really going after, but it's still big enough where you can meet your financial goals, that you can, grow.
Yeah.
But if you are going to go, head to head with somebody, you really need a path to being objectively better. And so, like, this market, it's a positioning. It starts with positioning. Who are we for, and which use case what do you use it for?
Yeah.
So it's like in the case of Klaviyo, it's clear if you're email marketing, probably on Shopify, and you have all these different triggers. Like Klaviyo is for that use case.
Yeah, and you're primarily.
So what is your use case?
Yeah.
Map that out. And then also brand-wise. So if brand strategy is an interesting one, where you ask the question of what can we do that others cannot do, which is hard to guess, but what is something that we can do that others won't do?
Yeah.
Because most brands are timid. They would never say anything provocative.
Especially B2B, right? B2B, very, very guarded, stick in the box.
Yeah.
Right?
It's all changing.
Yeah,
but
I agree. Yeah.
For the most part, most B2B companies are very vanilla.
Yes.
So becoming a loudmouth, provocative brand that takes a stance, and not on political issues, I don't mean. It's a possibility too, but more like.
But have an opinion, right? Have an opinion.
Having a point of view and an opinion, and you stand against certain status quo.
Yes.
And you can do like marketing stunts or whatever, lightning strikes that others just won't do because it goes against, the status quo is too hard,
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Yeah, I appreciate that too, because I think that's exactly like in real time. The meeting that I just got out of before we got onto the show was this conversation. And it's real for us. We're not a huge brand, but we are pretty well known, especially under the Constant Contact brand, as email, right? We're, good deliverability, best in class for email, but not the more complicated.
That's what everybody says, though. So that's those are table stakes features that are not differentiating you at all.
Yep, that's right. And so one of the reasons why we've been going through this exercise is saying, look, we're much more than that. We have a lot more sophistication under the hood, and we need to start bringing that to the surface. But then how do you package that, right? How do you package that and brand that? And I think that's the challenge.
Sure. And also sophistication is like, so there's a player like Customer.io in your space who is catering to the very advanced user, right? So their sophistication is,
Yep.
I don't know if but like that's their user is the technical power user.
Yep.
Who runs their whole basically CDP inside email marketing and marketing automation tools. They call it something as customer communication.
They
whatever.
do. Yeah.
Same thing,
Yeah.
So again, are you exactly that, or you are, so that which slices of the market are you going after, and what is the value that you can offer that the target user cares a lot about, and who is that person who cares a lot about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And developing what those pain points are, right? So I think that's one of the things that sort of leads me into my next question, and that is in How to Win, you sort of talk about extensively about listening to the customer, right? And it's a key pattern for successful companies. Right. And to me, a marketer's primary job is to really understand their buyer better than anybody else in the company. But we also, there's an irony in that, in the fact that in a lot of marketing organizations, we don't own that customer relationship. We don't have that insight into the customer the way that we should or we need to. And so I'm just kind of curious, what to the marketers who are listening right now, who are saying, you know what, I would love to do that, but I've got zero time. I've got my calendar stacked back to back. I've got a ton of things on my plate. I've got, the board meeting that's next week, and they keep punting on it. They keep pushing it down the line.
Hallelujah. Yeah.
How can they, what would you say to them? Like if you were talking to them, like, what does that really help them do? What does it help? How does it help them impact their strategy? How does it impact their campaigns, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, customer insight and really, as I call it, buyer intelligence. So it's not, yes, you need to know your users, but you also need to know the people who are not your customers yet, but should be one day. So what do they want? What do they think? Yeah. So if you don't know that, your marketing, the words on your website, in your ads, whatever you do, your content, are they hitting home? Are the people like nodding their heads? And if you don't know what are they thinking, you have no clue, and you might be sending out irrelevant messages that nobody cares about for years, right? So if you don't know the customer, that's the problem. I fully understand and sympathize with the marketer who just has no time for user research, customer research, buyer research, because everybody knows they need to be doing, customer research, but few are doing it because it's a pain in the butt, right? It really is, and I've done it plenty. I used to work as a consultant doing this for companies, so I know exactly what goes in there. Yeah. So if you have money, you can totally outsource this to an agency and consulting company that goes and researches your existing users and the buyers out there, comes back and tells you what it is, right? That's, if you have money and not enough time, that's absolutely a great option. I highly recommend it. B, depending on the size of your team, you might have an insights team. Oh, of course, I know that a lot of marketers don't like to work with the insights team because you give them a task or a question and they take like a quarter to think about it, figure it out, design a study. That's right. So it's slow. And also, if you're smaller, you don't have an insights team, so that's on you then. So you either deprioritize something else, and typically so many marketers are caught in the whirlwind of shipping shit, but okay, does it really, make a massive impact if we stop doing all these things? It probably doesn't change much. A small anecdote on this, at CXL, one of my, it's an e-learning company, one of my companies, I lost my whole growth team. Various reasons people left, just the coincidences on many fronts. And so for 6 months, I had to recruit a whole new team. For 6 months, we didn't do any marketing at all. During that period, our year-over-year growth was 40%. So all these important things we thought we were doing on a daily basis, none of it mattered. It's a great test for us. So you stop doing some of the whirlwind activities and just do the important but never urgent customer research project. So and you can get it done in 4 weeks.
Okay, so that's actually a great point and probably a good segue into the next question, which is, at the end of the day, what's fascinating to me is marketers take an inordinate amount of time to get learnings. They end up, a good example, like just visually speaking, when you think about quick iterations, micro testing, understanding what's going on to drive decisions and get confirmation, sort of that you're on the right track. Marketers kind of do this, right? In terms of test iterations, right? There's large cycles that take extensive periods of time, when in fact, what we need to be doing is really sort of doing iterative tests, at this sort of level, right? Small, micro iterative tests.
Big problem here is, though, that the typical way the marketers do it is feedback loops.
Yep.
Put something out there, see what happens, measure, and then decide. It's too slow. It usually, like if you run actually statistically valid experiments out there, it's going to take you, let's say, minimum 2 weeks, probably like 4 weeks, or even longer. And so, in order to learn, let's say you take 4 weeks to learn that something doesn't work, that's going to hurt,
Yep.
And the odds are it's not going to work. So
Yep.
you need to dramatically speed up your feedback loops.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do that. Like my company, Wynter, is exactly designed to solve this, give you buyer intelligence in like 12 to 48 hours, which would take you otherwise 4 weeks to validate. So there are ways to quickly validate messaging, landing pages, campaigns, all these things. Does it work?
Yep.
Does somebody care? Is it hitting home? Should we try again?
Yep.
So speeding up feedback loops is like a competitive advantage.
So I think that's interesting, right? I mean, just listening to your podcast, for the last several months, maybe longer now, I guess. But, I think you and I sort of talk and feel similarly about how copy is used in terms of more of a conversational language, a conversational style. And so, like I sort of like to say, like, I want to be able to use I want to know my customers so well that I'm using my customers' own words in my own marketing messages, right? Perry Marshall likes to talk about, how you take a page out, like your customer thinks you're reading a page out of their own diary, right? That sort of thing. And I think that's exactly right. So I'm just kind of curious, like obviously this is what you do, right? In terms of messaging, message testing, you've done tons of this stuff. So how do we as marketers, how do we get better at that? How do we, not only how do we get better at it, but then also how does it sort of impact our buyer journey? Like what are the metrics or the dials that we should sort of be looking at when it comes to sort of being, hitting on a proper message or a message that resonates?
Yeah, it's hard because symptoms of ineffective messaging are very hard to spot. You might be doing it for a long while and you still don't know. So the way marketers use their messaging, it's kind of like a sales call on a Zoom call, with cameras off, and the customer that you're pitching is on mute. So you're like saying things to the customer, but you don't see how they react. They don't say anything, and you can't see them. And you're just hoping and praying it's working. That's how companies use messaging. It's completely blind. And you mentioned message testing. That's exactly the antidote. Like anything you put out there, you should run message testing at Wynter or do it manually. Either way.
Right.
The metrics to use. So message testing, it makes sense when you use it on pages where you're trying to get user activation. Direct response. Sign up on my app, for my email list, whatever it is.
Right.
And so the metric is actually easy. It's conversion rate. There are, of course, other more subtle things like people get what you do. It emotionally resonates with them. That won't obviously show up in your analytics. So that's it's very important that people read and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. I see the value. I want it. And then them signing up is a cause. sorry, it's effect, and the cause is messaging. Like messaging gets them excited, and they clearly understand why you and not these other guys, and who is it for, and so when I talk about messaging analysis, there are like 4 heuristics, if you will, like clarity, most important thing, like do I get what you're saying, like as a human, like I'm trying to understand, so that using conversational language, using avoiding jargon and things like that. Second, value, the promise of value to be delivered, like is the promise of value something that is specific, and do I want it? If you just say grow your business, that's so boring, lame, and unspecific. Nobody's going to care.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, make more money, save time. It's so overdone. It's so overused. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So promise of value. Then relevance, meaning if I'm reading your pitch on your website or email or whatever the medium is it speaking to my priorities and challenges at hand? If you just say make more money with email marketing, that's like duh. Like in 1997, maybe that was a relevant message, because now it's like breathe air to live.
Right.
You don't need to tell me. I know.
Right.
And finally, it's differentiation, which in SaaS especially is a huge problem, because most companies pretend they're the only ones in the world.
Yeah.
So they talk about themselves as if they're the only ones doing what they're doing. Like in marketing automation, it's especially a big problem where they say, send beautiful email newsletters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, well, yeah.
It increases your efficiency. Yeah. You can send more of them.
Yeah, I mean, but like every tool enables me to send newsletters and do drip campaigns. Like, don't tell me.
That's right.
Don't talk about table stakes.
Yeah. I love that you say that. And one of the fascinating things to me is, like, I talk to marketers all the time, just like you do. And it's shocking to me. Well, actually, it's not shocking to me anymore. It was originally after the first 100 times when I heard it. But it is that the messaging that the company has been using for the last 2 years or so has been traced back to what the founder said, or the hippo in the room, had said when they started, putting the program together. And it's never changed, right? It's always, it sort of just stays the same. And I think that's surprising to me. And a lot of marketers, come to me and they say, okay, well, great. Yeah. But now how do I change that dynamic, this organizational mindset of this is what we've always said, and this is the messaging, this is the communication that we have. How do I convince an executive to make that shift, or at least have an open mind to other alternatives? Right. And what I tell them is, well, hey, look at what your leading indicators are, right? Because just from your own experience that buyer behavior changes over time, right? You're a software buyer. Like your buyer behavior, I guarantee you, has changed. The way you buy today is different than it was 5 years ago, or 2 years ago, and so therefore, it stands to reason that other people, potentially are shifting along.
Absolutely.
Too.
Competitive landscape has changed.
Right. So look, and what I sort of counsel them to do is I say, look at what your leading indicators are doing, right? Your numbers and your lagging indicators as well, right? So what's going on right now with CAC? Is your CAC, is it continuing to go up no matter what you do, right? You're optimizing, things that are, you're doing the little micro levers. Is that having an impact? Like, are you testing things? And you sort of, from their perspective, they sort of nod their head and they say, yeah, I've done that. I feel like I've optimized everything I can sort of like get my hands wrapped around. And that's when I say, okay, well, let's take a look at value proposition. Let's take a look at messaging and positioning. And, like, what are those things? Like, are we saying the right things to the buyers today? Or has that changed? And so I guess one of my questions to you is, like, well, let's talk, like, what would you say to marketers whose CAC is sort of, continually on the rise, right? Month over month, quarter over quarter, they're having the same conversations with CFOs saying, what's going on? What can marketers sort of do about that? How do they sort of win in that, different sort of buyer behavior today?
So when companies start out with the founder message, the hippo message, it's usually because the founder had an insight about an opening
Yep.
in the market,
Yep.
which is what led them to build the company, and and if the company survived, that was probably spot on. Now, of course, the world has changed, and I think almost no executive takes stupid decisions on purpose. It's usually out of ignorance
Yeah.
or old habit,
Yeah.
inertia. So if we believe, like I think we can all agree that the world has changed. Is our messaging still current and relevant, and does it stand out, and is it differentiated? Of course, if you're the category leader,
Yeah.
you don't care about this because everybody else needs to be different from you. If you are not Shopify, and you want to build an e-commerce platform,
Yeah.
you better want to say something different than Shopify, right? So that dynamic is very important, and the way to test it again, it's message testing, putting your messaging in front of your target buyers and say,
Yeah.
hey, is it clear? Is it compelling? Do you want the value? Is it differentiated? Why or why not? When it comes to CAC, besides okay, there's the marketing optimization where we're fine-tuning our landing pages and messaging and design and all these things, targeting, campaign targeting. But there's also the other thing of like brand. Companies buy from companies they've heard of, that
Yep.
they know.
Yep.
And so brand as a differentiator and brand awareness, the saliency, like being in the consideration set is huge.
Yeah.
Because if I'm looking for a new marketing automation software, I only have 3, maybe up to 5 companies that I'm going to look into, like my consideration set in my head. And if you want to get in there, you have to pay a lot of money. Like your CAC is going to be high. So if you're not already organically in there, so like Monday.com bought their way into the consideration set, but how much money did they spend? If you look at their public reports, they spend double their revenue every quarter.
Yep.
You probably don't have that kind of money. If
Right.
you do, you can pull it off, but odds are you don't.
Right.
So we can look at the research of like what makes marketing more effective, the marketing effectiveness movement, which is picking up speed. And really it says companies that invest, more or less 60% of their efforts in brand awareness, brand ads, and distinctiveness and all these things,
Yep.
their activation ads are going to work better over time. So if you only do direct response advertising, buy now, you're going to make more money next month. But if you put 60% money in brand, then 2-3 years from now, you're going to make way more money
Yeah.
compared to if you just did direct response.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you would have to look at all the things. Most marketing makes little difference because it's little different. Everybody does the basic things.
Yeah.
Oh, we also publish a blog post, and we also have a podcast, and we also post on LinkedIn.
Yeah. That's
Well,
right.
well, is that interesting, content? Because it's the good old long tail still prevails, right? There's some that are breaking it in, and then everybody else has crumbs.
So I've been a huge fan of CPG marketing for a long time. I've never actually worked in a CPG company, but I had somebody on the podcast not too long ago where that's what he did. He ran the CPG marketing for a, they were a, $10-12 billion, business. And the similarities are really important. Actually, the funny thing is you'd mentioned that 60% number for, what's happening in brand and awareness.
Yep.
Is exactly the number he used, right? He's like, 60-40 is the way I would split my budget. And I would primarily be spending most of it up there. And he described it sort of like a game of Plinko. Do you know what Plinko is? You've seen Plinko?
No.
So if you remember the Price is Right, there's this game on Price is Right where you put a little dial or like a disc at the top of this Plinko board, and then it would just sort of bounce in between pins all the way down to a bucket at the bottom. or a series of buckets at the bottom, and each bucket would have a certain dollar amount. Like you would win $100 if it landed in this bucket, or $1,000 if it landed over in this bucket, or whatever. And he described it like Plinko. Like he's like, I don't know necessarily where the disc is going to land, one where like on like one bucket versus another bucket. But what I do know is that over time, as I invest in these upper channel or upper in the awareness channel and in my brand, what ends up happening is the revenue does trickle through. And he talks a little bit about like sort of that scary vacuum in the middle, right, between sort of performance marketing kind of stuff at the bottom that's really easy to measure, and then the brand dollars that he's putting at the top, and how he's investing and then sort of justifying his budget. So I guess here's my question. So when you're selling a product like that, and let's just stick it to like B2B or what we know about software, what do we think right now? How do we sort of communicate that story to executives where, maybe my buyer isn't in market today, but they're going to be in market, in another 6 months or a year. How do I communicate to executives to continue to invest in brand when that executive maybe doesn't buy into that effect, or really they're just, they're kind of looking at just only performance marketing. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are there.
I think education is the key. Education is the key, and you as a marketer also, you need to have some clout in the company. Like people need to trust you.
Yeah.
If you have a history of letting people down, any new initiative was gonna likely not be approved. So, but there's a lot of excellent data coming out of the UK. I think it's the organization is called IPA, like the type of beer. But like Les Binet and those guys. The book, the long and short of it, is like a 30-page book. Has a plenty of data, and they did a follow-up study during COVID, like companies who stopped advertising versus companies who kept advertising, and the long-term revenue impact, TLDR. Like companies who kept on investing in brand and so on made a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the data is there. You can make a case. If they don't want to, buy the story, today is the employees market, right? Like everybody and their mother is trying to hire a marketer, and there's a CEO that gets marketing out there.
Yeah,
I'm hiring too.
Yeah. So I like the plug. That was good. I think so. The way that I when I talk to marketers that are sort of in that situation, one of the things that I say is, I use how does your CEO buy? If they are buying a certain way, they're not just in a vacuum doing it their own way, right? There's the behavior that they have is typically going to mirror some of the behavior that their counterparts are, or maybe it's a VP or whatever. So there's that. And then the other thing that I talk about a little bit is, just ask, right? I mean, ask them, ask your buyers where they heard about you. And, so you end up very simply put, like, there's super easy, right, in your request a demo or somewhere that's a action oriented, component on your site, just ask very quickly in an open-ended way, how did you hear about us? Where did you hear about us? And so what's interesting is, like, when I came into this role, that's one of the things that I did is I came in and I said, okay, well, within SharpSpring, I added a field in my request a demo, talked to a sales rep, and I captured all of that data, and it was like 1,100 or so responses. And then I mapped that response back to, so then I ask, and so you hear like exactly probably what you would like, what you would think, like they heard about me on this podcast, or they heard or about the brand, from a colleague. Maybe they changed jobs and they went to a new company and they had a good experience and they want to implement it in their new company, right? So that's happening a lot, as people are changing jobs in this market.
That's right.
Word of mouth, et cetera. And And so that's what you'd see, right? I could map it out and I could show you on a pie chart, where all of those things were. But one of the things I did is I sort of took it a little bit further and I said, okay, well, show me the original source that Google Analytics would show, or in our case, like what the CRM would show, and what you think it would be, right? Lots of it was SEO, lots of it was direct type, lots of it was, branded PPC, clicks, to the site, et cetera. But that wasn't the original that somebody took to come to the site, right? Something caused them to take that action, and do those things and make the search in the first place. So when I show that to an exec, it completely changes the way, like it gives me a lot of, a lot of sort of credibility when it comes to saying, okay, well, we need to not be focusing 100% on these things over here. What we need to be focusing on is what drove that original source. And then here's all the things, right? Here's 1,100 customer responses that show you exactly what they remember they heard us, from. And that, that gives you a lot of that credibility when you go into the room. But you got to.
When I do demos for Wynter, I ask like, "Hey, how'd you hear about us?"
Yeah.
And I want to say 90% of that is going to be somewhere on LinkedIn. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Somewhere on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of organic LinkedIn content.
Yeah.
Or I heard it from a Slack group. So basically word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
And I also know which Slack groups. And so if I were to just pull up my analytics and try to do attribution, LinkedIn organic content and this Slack groups would not show up.
That's right.
That's like the dark social or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a third piece, and I'll save that for maybe another discussion or something. But yeah, I think that conversation, and then to a point that you made earlier, needing and having credibility when you walk in the room in the first place, I think is huge, right? So doing what you say you're going to do, execute well, right? Talk an executive through the chapters of the book, right? If you've sort of seen and read the book before, you kind of know how this works, and you can kind of give them the preview. And so when that comes to pass, come back to them and say, here's what we said at the beginning of the quarter or beginning of the month, and here's sort of what's happening. And, as we talk through it, and you sort of like just go through that process of reinforcing, right? So, okay, last question. So we published this research study, I think it was late last year, where we talked to about 187 B2B marketers, I think it was, and we asked them sort of like, what's your biggest friction point in your organization? Like, what's getting in the way of your success? And nearly 47% said that it's really just what they call lack of time and budget. Okay, that's the. I'm going to put that in air quotes for a second because that can mean a lot of different things. But 47% of them said lack of time and budget. So what sort of ways would you sort of educate or talk to a company or a marketing team who's saying, look, I'm underwater, I'm wearing a lot of different hats, I'm stretched too thin, I don't have enough budget to hit my goal is too high. Like, what would you say to them when they're coming to you with a question or challenges like that?
And the problem, they're saying that they don't have enough time and budget.
Lack of time and budget. Mm-hmm.
So a single marketer, depending on, of course, on the team, like what are all the things the team is doing, and so likely there's a bunch of stuff that you could trim off as low impact activities. And if you want to figure out what's a low impact activity, just pause those activities for a week or two and see if anything happens. And of course, activities have lag time. So some things, like you stop doing, you don't do your whatever monthly webinar, nothing much happens. But if you don't do it for 9 months in a row, bad things can happen.
Yeah.
So I'm fully aware of that fact. That being said, that's how you can craft craft more time. Most marketing is just so boring, and so I would try to drop all the mundane, boring activities, and it's like, what can we do where everybody is going, where everybody else goes right, and we can go left.
Yeah.
The story of Drift and how they intentionally did different things.
Right.
So I think that's most companies are engulfed in sameness, and most marketing is as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing I would tack onto that, I love what you said, go the opposite direction than the norm, right? And at the end of the day, that, marketing is an attention game, right? We sometimes forget that, or we mute it. And I think, one of the things that because I'm more of a numbers person when it comes to trying to understand my own marketing, especially when I'm coming in, what I do is I look at it and I say, okay, well, show me what's working, right? Or what we think is working, because I want to go through that exercise. Like, what do we think is working? And we talk about all of the different initiatives that we're doing, right? And then what I do is what I will do usually before the meeting is I will just sort of dive into the actual CRM and say, okay, show me the last year's worth of deals that we closed, right? And then figure out like what activities were actually, Pareto's rule, 80-20, really look at like what was really the 20%, 30% of the campaigns that were really driving that, 80% of the closes, right? And, it's usually comes down to like, we were doing 12 things, but 3 things were driving 80%, and we should stop doing the other 9, and when I did this in the last company that I was in, one of the things that we realized was, 70% of the effort was actually on the things that were driving 30% of the revenue of the close. And, and it doesn't take much, like it wasn't rocket science, all we did is we shifted away from those things. We did less things better. Right. And we focused on but that's so hard as a marketer because you're always trying to keep up. You're always trying to push ahead. And so we naturally go to that place of trying to do more things. And we think that activity for activity's sake is somehow going to get us to the number, or it's driven by an external factor, right? We're being directed to do those things. And, I love the fact that we, as marketers, we have the ability to look at our own data and tell the story in a way that convinces an executive or ourselves, really, even if we didn't have an executive to report to, if we were just a business owner, we can convince ourselves very easily that these are the right things that we should be doing. We should just be doing them better. So.
Yeah. Do less, but better over do a whole bunch of mediocre stuff any day.
Totally agree. Man, I know we went over. I so appreciate the time, and thanks for hopping on. And I guess, how do people get a hold of you? How do they hear about you? Like, can you tell the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so there's nobody else by my name. Just Google Peep Laja, and you'll find me.
Awesome. All right, man. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Peace.